again for part 2 with Dr. Jim Willie discussing everything under the sun having to do with shit hitting the fan, what you can do about it, you know, what we need, what we can look forward to seeing, because he does make a lot of predictions, right? He does a lot of forecasting, and he also examines current events. And you can tell from the discussion, from just any one sector out there, that we're in a lot of hurt and you need to be prepping. You need to have food, water, shelter, clothing, medicine, and a means of self-defense, right? And if you can support Jim, do it. And I want to thank you for supporting the Prepared Mind Network. We need to do all we can to learn all we can about everything that's coming, and it's coming in a big, big way. You guys be cool, and I'll talk to you very soon. Bye-bye.
Okay, the oil trade. Let's get back on track. I don't mind going past an hour, John. I've got time if you got time.
Oh, yeah, I got time. Let's do it.
You can split this into 2 parts if you wish. Whatever. It's your show. The oil trade is a very important piece. I mentioned the petrodollar and how the derivative structure is being dismantled for the last few years. I've mentioned the structural element. Let's just talk about the trade element, the flow, the cash flow element of the trade, the oil trade. Okay, you got oil flowing and you got money the other direction to pay for it. Okay, this is very important point. I asked before the show, put you on the spot, why would the Wall Street banks and the Fed monetary suppliers, why would they continue to support the U.S.-based shale oil business when it's running at a loss? And that is the key question. It's running at a loss.
Yeah.
We heard 2 years ago the Wall Street banks moan and groan that these ventures had to be attached with covenant features, which is a fancy way of saying making it really easy to grab their assets when they fail. The covenant features are part of the loan structure.
Okay.
And they're like pre-designed asset grabs. In these last 2 years, the Wall Street banks have let it be known, not voluntarily, it's kind of slipped out, that they're continuing to lend money to the dead shale oil companies, oil and gas, and the lending is to guarantee debt service. In other words, the Wall Street banks are lending good money after bad in order to continue the debt service. Since when does a lender lend money to continue an unprofitable dead business just to pay the monthly debt?
Right.
Okay, that's the main key question. Here's the answer. A little preface. The Saudis are selling oil to China, not in the dollar. The Saudis are selling oil to the Russians for liquidity assurance. We don't know in what form. I suspect they might be getting some RMB, but the ultimate irony would be that the Russians are giving US dollars in the form of treasury bonds and treasury bills to Saudi after receiving the treasury bonds from China for the construction of the pipeline. Now that's a triangle that's full of irony. The Holy Grail was a deal 4 years ago, $230 billion, more than 10 years, maybe 20, where the Chinese would help build the pipeline in Russia, and I think pay for it in treasury bonds, and the Russians would then sell oil to China, and receive payment in RMB, use the Shanghai system of futures to convert RMB to gold, maybe directly from oil to gold, because before the Petro Yuan contract was in Shanghai, the oil gold contract was there. That was to facilitate the Holy Grail Russian oil sales to China. China bought oil and paid in RMB, immediately converted to gold. I believe the pipeline was constructed by Russia, paid for in treasury bonds by China, and Russia is dumping them on the Saudis. Mm-hmm. Okay. A very interesting and historically unique triangle there. So the point is that the Saudis are not having the majority of their oil sales in dollars anymore. And they're not recycling their surpluses into dollars, into treasury bonds, because they don't have any surpluses.
Right.
And they don't have surpluses for two big reasons. The oil price is way down, and they're blowing tons of money on the Yemen war, along with the UAE, which is also depleted of its savings account, but in a different form. I believe the UAE royals have pilfered their national sovereign wealth funds.
We're going to war with Yemen to get the Yemenis oil, are they not? Or is that what we can suspect? Why else go there if the reserves held by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are
Let me give you a little geography background.
Okay.
The Arabian Peninsula does not have Saudi on the coastline. It has Yemen on the coastline. North of Yemen is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has Persian Gulf coastline. Saudi Arabia has a little bit of Indian Ocean Gulf coastline. The majority is Yemen. I made an accusation 2 years ago that the Saudis were using lateral drilling to go under the Yemen border and steal Yemen oil. And that got confirmed a year ago. So it's not just forecast, it's more like opinion. In marketing research, we call them constructs. I put on the wall a constructed opinion that the Saudis were stealing Yemen oil with yet lateral drilling. How did it get confirmed? In an oil magazine article, but also from a petroleum engineer client of mine.
Ah. Proof,
Jim,
huh? Evidence.
I know about it because I saw it. Okay, the point is the Saudis are selling a lot of oil not in the dollar. So why does the United States continue with an unprofitable oil business in the shale sector? The answer is to produce dollar volume in the oil trade, to compensate for the grand loss from the Saudis, not just the Saudis. Qatar, Q-U-A-T-R, they really call it Qatar. I call it Qatar because I control my mouth, and I don't care being wrong. Wrong about a name pronunciation. Okay, the Qataris sell oil and gas to China in RMB. And they don't get any venomous, vindictive retribution from Washington. Why? Because we got a big military base there. Because we got other deals with the Qataris. Because they're very friendly with the Deutsche Bank in blowing money there and buying time for the derivative complex. Okay, the point is the Wall Street banks with their creditor, uber creditor, the Fed, are supporting a losing enterprise with shale in order to keep the flow of dollars in the oil trade, and it's not going to work much longer.
That barrel of money's running dry, Jim?
No, it's the flow. Well, okay, the barrel. If you want to say the volume output in the shale sector,
yes,
it's reduced. It's getting reduced. But there's now an executive in the shale sector, one of the companies. He made a statement, I think, about 3 weeks ago, that this is an end game that's near its end. This is not working.
Right. And
what he's trying to say is we're losing money and we're getting support to continue losing money. And what are we doing here? Okay, he has a micro focus. Okay, he's an executive. He's got employees. They've got families. They need income, and that's all fine. But we got a losing business. What are we doing? On the macro side, we got a losing business. What's going on here? And what he needs to hear is the byline from Wall Street. We need to keep the dollar volume flowing in the oil trade. Shut the hell up. Because the Saudis have abandoned the dollar. We are, I think, soon going to engage in terrorism events in Saudi, blowing stuff up, including shrines. like we did in, oh gosh, Ascaria in Iraq. We had 24-hour per day guards, 20 different soldiers, and the Ascaria Shiite shrine was blown to smithereens. And we called it a terrorist event. Mm-hmm. We had 20 soldiers around the clock protecting it. Okay, we are the terrorist agents. U.S., Langley, British, MI6, and that little country in the southeast corner of the Mediterranean with their M group. These are the terror axis. And ISIS is part of their game. Gosh, I thought it was so funny. 3 years ago, there was a Texas plumbing company that had its advertisement on the side of an ISIS pickup truck loaded with a submachine gun, A&P Plumbing.
Right.
And the guy wondered, my gosh, that was my trade-in last year. Yeah. What's it doing in Syria?
Yeah, that was national news.
It's because Langley is in control of ISIS. And they get a lot of Saudi support in men and funds. Why is Saudi bankrupt? 3 main reasons. I mentioned 2 before, but now I remember the 3rd. The low oil price, the Yemen war, and ISIS funding. Mm-hmm. And they got caught. And the U.S. did a big retreat in Syria, and very well publicized. We've got the 2nd best military now. Now, you mentioned all the different countries buying S-400 military defense missiles system. Yes. They're defense missile systems. And they work against missiles, and they also work against fast-moving aircraft. Yes. You know, like a B-1 bomber or, you know, a Mach 1.2 fighter jet that's loaded with payload.
And they can track, and I believe they're getting good at tracking both stealth equipment as well as the fighter jet, the stealth fighters.
I don't want to get into how the Russians got their superior weapons. Some of it was internal, and some of it was, let me just say, handed to them.
Trade secrets given to them, huh?
Let's not call it trade secret, because that has a human copyright contract element to it.
Okay.
Let's just say that something was many different technologies were handed to them. I don't like to get into these, peripheral discussions. Okay, there's some internal and some external. And at the USS Donald Cook incident, after the Ukraine war was launched by the US and Israel and blamed on Russia, Russia reacted in the Crimea, and they had, a referendum. And it was something like 97% wanted to join Russia. The referendum was not in the US or Western news. And it was all in reaction to the US and Israel managing the Maidan riots and revolt with at least 1,000 vials of amphetamine passed out and 12 police on the rooftop shooting at the people in order to create the mayhem, which was all blamed on Russia. Right. Oh my gosh. If you believe the Russian complicity for the Ukraine revolt, you are a dumbass.
Well, yeah.
Not Donbass.
Dumbass.
Not Donbass region of Ukraine. You are a dumbass.
We've got about 70 years experience now watching how the CIA operates to meet and exceed the expectations of the military-industrial complex and the political efforts around the world, from Iran to up to Ukraine, and everything in between. It's been one hell of a show, and it's pretty easy to see now, especially with our instantaneous global communication networks, and everyone's a news reporter, and they can pass it along quickly, and it's served us well. Jim, can we move to oh my God, I want to get your opinions on gold and what is going on with the monetary system and Instex and if I can drag you back over there,
Sure,
kicking and
sure.
screaming.
But before I get dragged, let me just say that in Ukraine, we had some very serious evidence of human body part trafficking.
Mm.
The
Wow.
forest outside Kiev had a grave site where at least 2,000 bodies were missing their major organs. And the primary nation for involvement in body part trafficking, human body part trafficking, is Israel. And it's their hospitals, and it's a few New York, New Jersey hospitals connected with that. The other thing that became very well publicized about the Ukraine war was the U.S. Experimental usage of micronuclear bombs. They with the explosion, you can say, "Oh gosh, what a powerful explosion that was!" And what you don't see is the huge mushroom. You see a very small mushroom, and it looks just like the other conventional type. Okay,
Remember
gold.
those? They got a little bit of publicity, the micro nukes. Oh, look at that. And then it just went away.
They came rumors that were dismissed, denied, and They moved on until 3 months later there was another.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of talk about, well, the U.S. is kind of desperate to fend off all the rebel forces. I don't even I don't want to get into what the rebel forces. They have several factions. Some of them are very Russian. Some of them are not. They're just Ukrainians who don't like what's going on.
I believe the Ukraine, was it Ukraine where they had that airplane tried taking off and it just dumped gold all over the runway?
Yeah,
At
yeah.
the same time as that micro nuke went off, it was just part of the same.
Now, speaking of gold in Ukraine, there was approximately 23 tons of Ukrainian central bank gold that was confiscated. I'm going to be moving into the gold theme here.
Okay.
And the Ukrainian officials who were appointed by the U.S. and Israel said that it was going to the New York Fed for safekeeping in a war zone. Like with Libya, they'll never see it again. They'll never see their 22 or 3 tons of gold again. And there were a lot of actual reports of men with black covered masks at 2 a.m. removing the gold and putting it on a flight with no approval from the flight tower. Okay, this is how they lost their gold. And it's at the New York Fed. Pardon me.
Is that part of the gold that got paid back to Germany?
I have a strong opinion that there was a war in northwestern Africa in a country called Chad.
Mm-hmm.
And after 5 years, Germany was repaid from stolen gold in Chad.
Okay.
We just moved some forces in, guarded a mine, brought in the drillers, brought in the concentrate managers, and moved out probably 90% gold, sent it to Switzerland where it got refined, and in 5 years it got paid back. The whole debt to Germany got paid back, and the hint was a pretty stupid report issued by Langley that said that the output from Chad would be X per year, and they would probably get involved with the industrial mining of Chad for about 5 or 6 years. So multiply the two numbers, and it was exactly the 300 tons owed to Germany. Okay, so if you're pretty good with napkin math and your ears work well, you can figure some of these things out.
Right.
Okay. Now, I have something that I call the dual universe. I don't want to get into how it all came about, the thinking, but let me just say that Langley is deeply devoted to the dollar. They've got what are commonly called 7 silos. Have you heard that term before, John?
I don't think I have, Jim. And
Okay.
I listen pretty well.
The 7 silos are independent organizations within Langley that run themselves, and some of them have profit, and they manage their cash flow, and they manage their savings, and they have their own rules and regulations, they have their own enforcement, and they have their own independence. Here are some of them. The Afghan and NATO heroin business. 80% of all heroin is grown and produced in Afghanistan. And despite all the expenses to limit the terrorism and all the drug production during the U.S. military occupation and oversight and protection of Afghanistan, their heroin production went up tenfold.
Yes. Yeah. Funny how
A
that
bullshit. A bullshit. Okay. So they need more funds because the resistance is so firm. Instead, the Russians and Chinese have told us, get the hell out. Okay. I've got it on good authority from a couple of hat trick letter clients that Ramstein, Germany, is a major heroin mover for NATO. And they use the unmarked military uniforms. They might have a couple of bars or a star. That means rank. But they're unmarked as far as, say, U.S. Marines, USM, or, the camouflage standard U.S. Army, or the blue Navy and Air Force. They don't have that. And they all arrive after 10 p.m., and they do their work, and they ship stuff out. And if you get in their way, you get arrested, and you go to the brig. I've actually got a story from a client who has a really good friend who served in Vietnam and served in a very large Thailand Air Force base. And he learned through scuttlebutt and through testing of the barriers, he learned that all the Vietnam bodies from dead soldiers went to this Air Force base in Thailand, where they were loaded with 100 pounds of heroin and shipped to the United States. We've been in the heroin business for a long time. Okay. The dual universe is made up of the West being devoted to the dollar and the East being devoted to the Chinese RMB. I believe because of the Langley 7 silos, there will be a lot of pressure to continue the dollar, let's just call it business. Whether it's trade in heroin, whether it's trade in pilfered weapons. Okay, we've got 21 trillion missing, and the biggest portion of that is from the Defense Department. Another big portion is Health and Human Services, in other words, Fannie Mae. Another big missing element is State Department. Can you say Hillary?
Yeah.
Okay, so you've got a lot of pressure from the Langley 7 silos. You got their heroin business, you got their weapons business, you got their human trafficking business, whether it's body parts, white women, or children. Papa Bush was involved with the children in Langley. You've got other businesses in Langley. They could be, say, explosives. It could be ISIS. It could be the combination. That's another silo. It's a profit center funded in part by the Saudis, in part by the UAE. There are other silos there, and I've come to learn from a very reliable source that Greek ports contain, or I don't like the word contain, Greek ports hold numerous containers. I mean like the 30-foot containers, 10 feet high, and the big swinging doors that are often used for like cell phone, what do you call them? Cartons with hundreds of cell phones, television sets, we call them electrodomesticos here, domestic electronics.
Shipping containers.
Shipping containers. And you go to the Panama Canal and you see, oh my gosh, I can't even count how many containers are on that vessel. And you read in the newspaper, it's about 2,000. Mm-hmm. Okay. Langley has containers at the Greek ports filled with shrink-wrapped $100 bills. Do you think they're going to walk away from that?
No.
They're going to force, whether it's through murder, bribery, or basic threats, they're going to force the continuation of the dollar. Mm-hmm. And I think it's going to be in the Western Europe, Britain, the Americas, including, U.S. and Canada, North America, South America, Central America. I cannot imagine in 2 years' time at Costa Rica will not accept a $20 bill at a bank or even at a supermarket. Sometimes when I'm really short, I don't have any local currency. I go, oh my gosh, I got a $20 bill in there. They take it. And it's a good exchange rate that they take. Okay, so the dual universe will have tremendous pressure to sustain the dollar in the West. And they're not going to be able to stop the East. Think Asia, Russia, Iran, India, the subcontinent of India. Why do they call India the subcontinent? Because it's got 200 languages and it looks like a continent. It's huge. And it's got 1 billion people. Okay, let's call it a subcontinent because it's huge and it has 200 languages and it has its own, gigantic middle class, which is bigger now than the Chinese middle class.
Wow.
I think the 4 legs on the Eurasian trade zone are going to be China, Russia, Iran, and India.
And Brazil has stepped out.
Brazil has stepped out. Good point. I heard that from a Brazilian client who said we just cut way too many deals with the neocon Americans. Okay, now, if you've got the East with its Belt and Road, I call the Belt and Road projects, honestly, I got a cute name for it. I call it the Global Economic Reset. From the Eastern side, there's going to be nothing in the projects from the Belt and Road, nothing that will be dollar-based in commerce, nothing. So they got 6, 8, 9 trillion. I hear various figures. One article will say it's 6 trillion in MOUs, Memorandum of Understanding. Another will say it's 9 trillion and growing. All these projects, whether it's like a big bridge in Thailand or a gigantic natural gas storage center in Turkey or a tunnel that goes through Thailand and reaches, neighboring areas, none of the commerce will be in dollar. None. And I think some of the construction will be done in dumped treasuries. The irony is thick. Okay, so I call it the global economic reset, not the financial. Mm-hmm. The Belt and Road is going to make lots and lots of malls and roads and railways and ports, and it'll all be non-dollar. Right. The Chinese just invested, not in the U.S. news, but it's in the Hetrick letter, the Chinese just invested $100 billion in Pakistani ports.
So that's the economic development that the East is really pouring a lot of assets in.
Yes.
And economy. Now we've got this other issue, monetary reset.
Yes.
Is gold a part of that? Why do we need it? Why do we not want it? I would love your explanations on how gold is rolling in this other leg. You got economics, you got finance, and you got monetary issues. And okay. I consider you an expert in this, Jim.
Okay, I'll get to that. Give me a little closing comment on the dual universe.
Yes, sir.
You cannot have the East with the dollar, the East with RMB and the West with the dollar without zones of friction.
Right.
Where do they meet? I think they meet in the entire Gulf region, primarily Saudi. They meet in Eastern Europe, meeting Western Europe,
yes.
In particular Germany. And they meet in the Americas in the isolated area of Venezuela. My focus is primarily Iran, Iraq, Saudi, and Germany, but also Eastern Europe. Hungary is nowhere in the dollar camp. Poland just bought a big truckload of gold.
Yes.
Poland, the central bank. Now, we order Poland around like really poor, downtrodden servants. Yeah. I like to keep my language clean. Poland just turned around and said, screw you guys. Got a bug. We're buying a bunch of gold. And they did. Mm-hmm. Hungary bought a bunch of gold. And they will continue. Orban is one of my heroes. Viktor Orban, president of Hungary. He's blocked the what I call the Arab human garbage influx.
Yes, he's helping his country greatly.
Not a healthy influx at all. It's nothing but like a human contamination that qualifies for me as a 7th bowl in biblical proportions. 7 bowl, blood of war, pestilence, contaminated food, and contaminated human influx. They don't assimilate. They're full of violence. They get protected. whatever. Okay, so Germany has got the Instex that they set up as a special purpose vehicle in a SWIFT alternative. And they did something really funny. It's almost hilarious. They said that we're going to get approval of the Instex channel for making payments to Iran, bank to bank, and it'll be primarily for charity and medicine and other, philanthropic
Humanitarian,
purposes.
right? Humanitarian efforts.
Humanitarian purposes, and I go giggle, giggle, giggle. I can't laugh fast enough. So phase 2 will be for oil and gas. Now, what's funny about this, in a not so hilarious sense, is that France and England signed on for this Instex, which means that the French are going to take Iranian oil and gas and pay for it through Instex and be subject to American sanctions from Washington. Okay, I made a forecast a while ago. One of the last ones I call U.S. finds isolation. I made a forecast that the United States is going to be knee-deep in sanctioning its own allies.
Right. And
I said this in 2015. And now you have the sanctions threatened constantly against the German companies, financial and construction, regarding the Nord Stream 2. And you have other companies getting sanctioned and individuals in Germany getting sanctioned. And the Germans are sick of this. So the Germans are going to have 1 foot in the dollar pond and 1 foot in the I call it the non-dollar pond, because if it's not RMB, it's going to be, say, the euro. Germany is setting things up with Russian trade to do it in euros. They're very likely to be buying a lot of Russian oil and gas, including in the Nord Stream gas pipeline, Gazprom pipeline. They're very likely to pay Russia in euros. So I would not be surprised in the next couple of years if the dollar sees a decline versus the euro. And that opinion is shared by a few of my jackass colleagues. Okay, gold. This will be the final topic.
I'm going to have you all worn out by the time we're done, Jim.
Well, I get worn out with the throat. It's on day 12 of my little flu. I had to break down and cough a while ago, clear my throat. Okay, Mnuchin is the Secretary of Treasury, U.S. government.
Yes.
In the middle of March, he made a statement in the morning that the U.S.-Chinese trade negotiations had a significant agreement made with respect to currencies. And he did not provide much information on that. Now remember, I said March, before the breakdown in May. The whole trade talks broke down in May, and I got a really good explanation of it. It sounds very credible, seems credible, and I'm running with it. We had 3 agreements to make. We made 2, and the last one we couldn't make, and it was on timing. We don't want timing to be dictated to us. We want to continue our game forever. We want agreements to be made and not implemented because we're involved in the dollar forever game. Okay, so the first agreement was on currencies. The Chinese, if you look at their moaning and groaning in the last year, you'll see a theme. And the theme is the Chinese want the US dollar 15 to 20% lower. And, a smart person would say, well, that means the Chinese currency is 15, 20% higher, right?
Right.
Okay, and they're willing to deal with that because they're willing to have a big, strong emphasis on a 5-year plan of domestic development, middle-class growth, and domestic demand economically. But it also brings to the table the second point in the U.S.-Chinese trade talks. Okay, first is the dollar goes down 15%. For students of finance, you recall in 1995, there was something called the Plaza Accord, where all the other IMF currencies, that was before the Chinese yuan was part of the IMF basket, the SDR, special
drawing rights.
Drawing rights. I always want to say deposit, special drawing rights. Thank you. The Plaza Accord was a deal in 95 to bring down the dollar 15%. Now, when you're the reserve currency, you tend to get the push, the extra demand, the dollar-based loans, the dollar-based trade, the dollar-based banking reserve. The dollar gets the push, and it's sometimes too much. So what I'm calling is this U.S.-Chinese trade deal, I'm calling it Plaza 2. We want the same thing as Plaza 1. We want the dollar down 15%. That's the other nations. China is like the representative of the rest of the world who don't like the king dollar hegemony. You know, they're heavy-handed, bullying, violent methods, right, where they might murder a presidential candidate who's not pro-dollar. Okay, that's the sort of thing we've been doing. A guy named Campos in Brazil was murdered about 4 years ago. And his opponent got a phone call right before getting on the plane, and she decided not to get on that plane. Wow. So now she's a leading figure in Brazilian government pro-United States. So this is how we operate. There's a lot of objection to this. Okay, so the first element was the currency deal, dollar going down, Chinese yuan going up, but that would cause some damage to their export trade. So part number 2 is the gold price triples. Mm-hmm. The Chinese own a lot of gold. And if you believe that their central bank has something like 2,000 tons of gold, you are a dumbass. They've got at least 25,000 tons of gold just acquired since the 90s. If you look to their acquisition data, year in, year out, get your napkin out, add up numbers, and you get 25,000 tons. So when they put out their sovereign official reserves tally sheet that says they got 2,000 tons, you must begin to giggle.
And just last week, President Trump announced that we're going to bring the dollar down. He's going to start playing manipulation games, reputedly to battle them.
Satisfy the Chinese, John.
Say again?
That's to satisfy the Chinese.
Yeah, we make it sound like we're attacking them, but it's actually to satisfy them.
Well, he'll make it sound like we'll be able to increase our export trade and revitalize the economy. And if he doesn't, start 20,000 new businesses a year, he's going to fail. Right. Okay, let's get back to part 2. The Chinese, in return for their sacrifice of a higher valued currency, and they kind of like it because it comes with a certain element of prestige. They think, oh, our currency's stronger now. We've got respect. Okay, but there's a cost. It means that their Chinese exports will cost more, and they'll be lower volume. And they're willing to do that, provided the gold price triples. Right. Now, they own 25,000 tons of gold, I believe, in closely aligned financial firms related to the Communist Party, tied to their major banks and their central bank. 25,000. It could be 27. I don't care. They've got a lot of tonnage, 25, which, by the way, is triple what Fort Knox was before Bush, Rubin, and Clinton stole it all.
What we reputedly have is 8,000 tons in the U.S.
It doesn't change ever.
Yeah.
And it should be 0, if we want to be honest. And we call it, deep storage gold. And okay, Chocolate Mountain has some gold in California, and Pelosi's involved with some ownership in some sweet deals. Okay, fine. We've got some deep storage gold. I don't think we have anything near 8,000 tons of bar in gold. Right. And when Mnuchin visited Fort Knox in the first few months of the Trump presidency, he observed a lot of tungsten bars with gold clad on them. In other words, they're 98% tungsten, which is $70 a ton, not $35 million. Okay, so back to part 2. The Chinese want to triple the gold price.
Yes.
Because not only is there 25,000 tons of closely aligned official reserves, they've got 110,000 tons of White Dragon gold. White Dragon family, White Dragon society, Red Dragon, White Dragon, you name the dragon, they're elites. They're just think, if we've got DuPont, Ford, and Rockefeller, and a few others like Morgan, in 3,000 years, they've got a couple dozen also.
Right.
They're wealthy families.
Yeah.
And it's private stash.
Right.
Okay. They've got 110,000 tons of gold. This has been verified by The Voice to me. Now, he hasn't seen it. He just knows about its existence. He knows about it from various effects, like, they can do certain things. They can rescue certain countries. They can provide a complete revamp of a banking industry and remonetize. They can do things. They have it. They've shown that they can. They've shown that they have it by their actions. Okay, fine. The Chinese want to triple the gold price, but they've also got what they call an enforcement mechanism. Nations that have a big trade deficit, it's really a balance of payments deficit. Nations that have a big, let's call it a deficit. Let me make a quick definition. Your current account deficit is a combination of your goods and services trade deficit plus your financial investment deficit. For the longest time, the United States had a big trade deficit, but we sold a lot of bonds. Treasury bonds, corporate bonds, Fannie Mae bonds, you name it. We sold a lot of property. A lot of Europeans in Florida. A lot of Chinese in California. Okay, so we had an offset of our big trade deficit with a positive investment deficit, investment surplus.
Right.
The combination is called the current account deficit. Okay, fine. CAD. The current account deficit between two nations will be resolved with this enforcement mechanism with forfeiture of gold. And if it's not forfeiture of gold, it'll be a forfeiture of assets. Like, let's just say in Brazil, if they got a big deficit with Germany, Germany will get ownership of a few mines. The companies will come in and they'll seize ownership of some coltan mines. That's how they resolve their deficits. Enforcement through gold or asset forfeiture. That's what the Chinese want. And the U.S. says, okay, fine. We'll agree on a lower dollar. We'll agree on bilateral satisfaction with gold or investment. But we're not going to agree on part number 3, the timing, because we want to continue the king dollar. And Langley tells our negotiators, do not agree on timing because we have hundreds of billions in container vessels, containers in Greek ports. And our entire drug, weapons, and human trafficking is based in the dollar. So drag your feet on timing, make your agreement on the dollar part 1, make your agreement on gold in part 2, but don't make any agreement on timing. And then came the Tokyo G20, John. I got word before the meeting took place. I got word there's going to be some very serious finger pointing and warning and reading of the Riot Act to the Washington neocons. You start acting like a better global community citizen and you get rid of your pieces of shit neocons like Bolton, like Pompeo, who like nothing more than stirring up trouble and fomenting war for the benefit of the military-industrial complex. This is what neocons do, endless war. Right. Jimmy Carter came out with an anti-neocon press conference a couple months ago and said, we've only had 22 years out of 270 where the U.S. has not been at war.
Right.
He was basically saying the people running our country are pro-war, endless war. And we used to have the best weapons during Vietnam. After Vietnam, we had the best weapons, but we don't anymore. you got a major game changer. This is a global restructuring tool, like a carving knife. The S-400 missile defense system. It's for aircraft and missiles. The Russians have a 600-mile-an-hour torpedo.
Right.
And I thought, how on earth does that work? What it does is it creates a pocket, an air pocket, and it's essentially a launch of an air pocket where the torpedo happens to follow.
Right.
And it's not internally developed by the Russians. It was handed to them. I mentioned USS Donald Cook. The Soviet Su aircraft, the MiGs were around as their jet fighter aircraft for a couple decades.
Right.
Their newest generation is the Su. And I get confused, the S-400 missile system versus the Su fighter jet aircraft system. Okay, fine. Their jet aircraft, the Su, is equipped now with more technology that was not developed by Russia in Russia, by Russians in Russia. It is a jamming system for the U.S., what do you call it? Radar and targeting systems called Aegis. U.S. military, whether it's a howitzer on a ship, a destroyer, or whether it's a bomb site on the F-35s or F-17s or F-15, whatever, the fighter aircraft, or whether it's a torpedo system. Notice how you have these hints the last few years of ships running into each other. It's from their whole system of radar. Radar shows you the other ship that's 2 miles away and it's on a collision course. The radar is for locating your own and the foreign and the bogeys who are not identified. This Su Russian Air Force incident against the Donald Cook had 3, 4, or 5, I call them MiGs. MiGs is like, I grew up with the term MiGs. Yeah. They're Su aircraft. They flew circles around for half an hour. They flipped the bird. The Donald Cook was helpless. Now, you tell me, if the U.S. military has a helpless enemy vessel, you think they'll bomb it to shit? Or will they just flip them the bird and make an incident?
I think they made a scene and let them know that they have the electronic warfare capability to disable the U.S. military ships. And we have seen several examples of that, Jim.
Okay, we have. But if they're from a third world nation, we bomb the shit out of them.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, we bomb the shit out of defenseless nations like Iraq. We went in there, and I got my own stories about Iraq. Let me just do an off-the-cuff one. I met a fellow named Bill, and Bill was going to do some marketing for the Hat Trick Letter. And this was 2009. Bill was going to do marketing because he was pretty good at doing some stuff. He had a partner, a British guy, and we got into the long 2-hour conversation. What can you do for me? What will it cost? Show me your stuff. Show me some past successes. And I said, by the way, Bill, where'd you come from? What have you been doing the last few years? How long have you been doing this? And he said, well, I was in Iraq in 2004 and 5. And I got out and I started doing this as online marketing. And, it's green pastures. There's a lot of upside to this. I said, okay, what'd you do in Iraq? Tell me what you want. And he said, well, I worked for Halliburton. I said, oh, what did you do for Halliburton? He said, I was on the search and rescue, but we were searching for weapons of mass destruction, WMD. And I said, we didn't find any, which was a lie, right? And he said, oh, big fat lie. He said, we had hundreds of men like me going all over the place looking for warehouses of WMD, whether they were, nuclear or whether they were chemical or whether they were biological. We didn't care. They were all WMD and we wanted to capture it all. And I said, so you captured a bunch, huh? And he said, oh, yeah. And I said, let me guess, U.S. markings.
That's
And he said,
markings.
you got it. He said, we went in there to capture our own sales so that we wouldn't have the bad publicity and so that Israel wouldn't be hit with our weapons. And I said, were you paid well? And he said, sort of. I said, did you hear about corruption? And he said, oh, yeah, all over the place. Like jacking up the prices to have a 400% price markup on various things. Oh, yeah, all over the place. Gasoline, Halliburton supplied gasoline, and they had to pay triple the price from U.S. And they justified it by saying it had to ship it there and in a war zone, very dangerous war zone. Yeah, right. Well, we stole all the Iraqi gold too. Remember the stories about all the yellow painted wooden bricks?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was all real gold.
Wow.
We planted some yellow bricks so that the soldiers would see them and lift them and realize how light they were and talk about them. But we got a lot of their gold. It was reportedly over 40 tons of gold. We go into these nations, we steal their gold, we come up with bullshit reasons for going in there, false cause for war, casi de belli, false cause of war, and then we murder their leaders, steal their stuff, and bomb their shrines, and go home.